Well, happy Monday, everyone. Welcome to the Markcast here, your CFL Week 2 recap. Happy Juneteenth. If you have the day off, I know my wife Dorothy is off. Some of the schools, we're still in session, others aren't, but we are here today. No days off. We'll be doing our USFL Week 10 recap tomorrow with Pat Ruffino. Very excited to talk USFL playoffs there with two 4-6 teams making the USFL playoffs from the same division even. But today we're talking CFL. I have a lot to say today, so this will be good because I actually did my homework this weekend. We have Jason Hussey here and Evan Willsmore. Jason, how are you doing?
Doing great, Reed. How are you?
We're good. Evan, my West Coast compatriot here, getting up a few minutes ago to do this with me. How are you doing?
Yeah, not bad. Definitely a bit of an early start, but got another good slate of games to talk about, so looking forward to it.
I'm very excited here. We have Jay Thompson already coming in. Hey, what's up? So I decided after however many weeks of doing this with Andy, Pat, and everything, I decided I need to start taking notes for the weekend. So I actually did. I have notes for all the games. Actually, I was opposed to just like flying off the seat here. We have all that. Lots to talk about today. Kind of overall thoughts, and then we'll go kind of game by game here. Jason, what did you make of this? I enjoy seeing the blank here with the 0 score for the Elks. What did you make just overall of the weekend?
I think that in general, it was better in terms of the quality of play from week one, which is to be expected. But I think that in general, the quarterbacks played well, in the exception of a couple of cases we'll get to.
Evan, what did you make of everything?
Yeah, I would agree. I say, overall play quality increased, but unfortunately, the teams who still had struggles in week one that seemed to roll over into week two with Ottawa, Edmonton, and Hamilton in particular. Saskatchewan, they played a good game against Winnipeg, but didn't end up scoring enough to make it count in the end because Winnipeg put up 45. So we'll get into more of that later. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a bit of a better slate than last week.
Evan froze for a second. Yeah, I know. I have a lot to talk about Saskatchewan too because I saw a lot of tweets of there's a lot to look forward to here. Like we just got our ass absolutely handed to us by Winnipeg, but there's like a lot. I saw Ballsy talking about it and Hodge and everyone else like Saskatchewan. So we'll talk about that. Hang your heads high there. Pretty poor game, the Thursday night one, the Ottawa. A lot to say about with that. Marshall Ferguson, friend of me of the show, poo-pooing on XFL week 1 and 2. And I said, hey, Marshall, how's it feel here? We have some of these things going on. But overall, I thought it was fun. When I posted hey, our preview yesterday, hey, we're going to be talking about this morning. The couple notes that came up to me was one, the bad refereeing. Or bad officiating. I had a lot of comments about that. Jason, have you noticed continuing bad, play, whatever you want to call it here going into week 2?
Not especially from the referees so far this season. Not more than normal. I think that the natural thing about the CFL game is that there's going to be a lot of flags. There's more flags, I believe, on average than an NFL game. So, I mean, I'm just kind of used to it with the amount of penalties that are called. But maybe there's some specific cases that people would point to, but none that really pop into my mind.
And then it was like we had some roughing the passers and things. I was curious, if it's one person, we just have 3-4 people commenting on that. I thought it was at least something. Has that stood out to you as more egregious than others? Evan, are you alive?
Oh, me? Sorry.
Yes, okay.
No, if we're going to talk about, the refereeing, I think it's, in all of these leagues, I've heard complaints, especially, in the XFL and the USFL, because those are newer products. Obviously, the CFL's been around for longer, but I haven't noticed anything that stood out too much. I mean, every now and then you're going to get a bad call. It's just, maybe not right. And there were definitely some things in that BC Edmonton game that, you could maybe, I don't know if the referees maybe in that one had the best grasp, but they still figured things out in the end. And I thought, it worked out all right. So I don't know. I wouldn't sit here and complain about the refs. I mean, given just football in general nowadays, like there's a lot of blame on the refs in any league, like I was saying earlier. But I don't know. This to me just seems like, classic, like, oh, your team lost, so let's try and find a, excuse to make it seem a bit better.
Yeah.
The other thing too, I'm continuing to see people harp on like the live stats being updated. Now, obviously, we're here today, kind of going through the box score. Am I missing? Is it real time? It's not going on there. I've seen Hodge complain about that as well. Jason, are you tracking like the stats? Is it this thing? Am I missing where the problem is?
Yeah, so if you were to check during the game, there would be no stats available on anything, TSN, Google, Sportsnet, whatever you usually find CFL stats. So they don't have any live tracking on, and a lot of the times, like a while after the game, they don't have it posted. So that's a major problem, I think, for any professional sports league to have.
Okay, and because yeah, obviously here on this, I don't do a lot of like lives. I guess if I was out watching, Evan, has that affected your life at all? I mean, I know I've just seen a lot of people talk about this with like the sports betting and fantasy and all that.
Yeah, I haven't had too many problems with it. For me, I know I've been able to check during most of the games and it's been all right. There was a game last week, I think it was Winnipeg Hamilton, where it just kind of froze after halftime and it didn't really get going again until like the fourth quarter. Or the end of the third or something like that. I don't quite remember, but I don't know. To me, it hasn't been terrible. I think the greater conversation we should be having here is, why the CFL doesn't have an app yet with all this stuff in it. I keep having to go on my, web browser, Safari or whatever, typing in, CFL.ca and then clicking on the game tracker. It's just a bit more work than I'd like to have to put in. With the XFL, I could just go over to ESPN and that would all be there. With the USFL, you could just use the Fox Sports app. So it's a bit surprising that the CFL is kind of lacking in that category.
Well, I just would have thought, now we're 2 years into this Genius Sports thing and all of that. I see it. A lot of times people make fun of that, like, oh, this is the thing, Genius Sports. But yeah, certainly something here. If the XFL, and I think even their app, I'm not living and dying by any of these leagues' apps, but even the XFL one, like sending out the notifications and, hey, the game's coming up and this is the touchdowns and you can kind of track it along. I just think it's helpful. It makes it feel more. I know last year, the USFL, they weren't piped into whatever app I used to like live track my stuff. And it felt like these games were existing in a vacuum. We're a little more this year. You're getting the notifications. Hey, there's a touchdown. Okay, third quarter starting. I think that's helpful. You're like, oh yeah, that game is going on. I should go watch it versus, oh, this game happened. I kind of missed that. So, Jason, any other thoughts on that? We'll get to the games.
Not really anything more to add. I think that it would provide another engagement tool. I do agree about the app. I just think that's a basic thing to have in today's world. And I think the CFL in general really struggles in terms of the digital space. They're really trying to improve that with this whole Genius Sports thing. And I think that, the inexcusable thing about the stats thing is that they had a system before that worked fine for doing live stats during the game. Why did they take that down before launching the other one? Like, why didn't they just keep the old one up until the new one was ready to go? So that's what I can't wrap my head around with that.
Well, I think it's interesting, and obviously, I think change is coming in general for the CFL. I remember, like last year, we had Danny Austin, and a lot of the guys that normally would come to Grey Cup didn't come, right. And now this year, we saw all the layoffs last week with the TSN 1260, and I got with Dustin over there and Jason Greger and kind of longtime friends to the show, and trying to figure out like I'm just curious like what all this becomes now. Where if you're the CFL and we're losing some of these like traditional outlets that are covering us anyway, right? And whether they are choosing to or not. I mean, in the case of if you're getting laid off or whatnot, like I'd be curious to see how the CFL kind of rides this out, where it's already kind of this niche fringe thing and trying to attract. You know what I'm saying, Evan? Are you like you trying to get some of these people now? Like, I'll be curious, like who, if you do decide to come to Grey Cup this year with us, like who is still there this year that kind of is doing the daily stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's definitely a lot of people in this space. I think it's similar to the league where, maybe there's been a lot of things that have been the same for a long time, and now you're starting to see some changes, especially after the pandemic. I mean, the CFL, missed an entire season in 2020, and I do think that plays a role into some of the sort of, I wouldn't say lack of interest because there, are longtime fans that have stayed loyal, but I think it's just harder now to kind of attract new people into this market, especially people like me who are younger. It's really difficult because, like you said, it's a niche product, and now we have so many leagues like this just in the United States. Between the XFL and the USFL, I think people would rather spend their time with that because it's more local as opposed to doing something with the CFL, which is technically an international product. But yeah, no, I definitely agree. There has been a lot of turnover, and it will be interesting to see, how is this going to go in the future, not just from all the stuff we talk about, on the football side and the operations side, but the media side as well.
Jason, anything else to add?
Not really, but yeah, I do agree that it's incredibly hard to attract the younger fans in this day and age. And I think that the biggest problem is, like I was saying about the digitalized content. It's really important for in this today's day and age for companies and businesses to really reach the consumer on the platforms that they're currently on. I don't think the CFL does a very good job of doing that. So that's definitely something that they need to look to improve in the future if they want to survive.
All right. Let's go here. I guess we'll start at the end and work back. This was the game I saw the least amount of, but I certainly caught up on the highlights and kind of everything else. Sway Kelly making his big debut here, Chad, for the Argonauts, thrashing the Hamilton Ticats. I called on the show. Was it our pregame show? I said, Bo Levi Mitchell is going to be duty this year. Has played, poorly in 2 games. We'll start with Jason here. What did you make of the Ticats 14-32 loss?
Well, I was in attendance at BMO Field for this one. Great seats, but unfortunately for me, as a Tiger Cats fan, it was just more of the same from week one. I think that maybe they played in general better than they did in week one, which is funny because they lost by more points. But I think that a couple key things are the key red zone interceptions in the first half. Those took really, points off the board for the Tiger Cats. Even if you get 3 points there, I think it would have been a completely different game from that aspect. Just really bad interceptions from Bo Levi Mitchell. I think that the play calling for Hamilton was very predictable. Run on first down into the line for 2 yards, and then you're stuck in second and long. So I think there was a lot of those situations. So I'm not impressed with the Tiger Cats offense through 2 weeks. My panic level is probably about to a 5 with this team right now because, of what we've seen the first couple of weeks. But we have yet to see this team play at home. They've arguably played the 2 best teams in the league the first 2 weeks. So I'm, kind of holding back a little bit of my concern for that reason. But at the end of the day, pretty disappointing start to the season for the Tiger Cats perspective.
Evan, initial thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so from the Hamilton side, I definitely agree. The play calling needed to improve. Bo Levi Mitchell, I said last week, it's going to take a couple games for me to really decide, whether or not he's just progressing in his career at this age or, whether it's a situational thing and, maybe he's going to get better after, falling out in Calgary the past couple years. But to be honest, after last night, I'm already starting to draw the conclusion that, maybe this is just age and it's just not a great fit. Matt Schultz came in like the middle of the fourth, like start of the fourth kind of, and honestly played better, I think, than Bo Levi did pretty much the entire game. And, Matt's someone I know personally. I interviewed him about a year ago, good friend. James Butler played well. He was, of course, the big free agent addition for them over from BC. And then Duke Williams, who came over from Saskatchewan, had a nice game. But outside of that, I don't know. There wasn't a lot to write home about for Hamilton. Unfortunately, that one never really felt. I mean, by halftime, even it was 22-6, and I was kind of sitting there like, do I even keep watching? And yeah, to be honest, the rest of the game just kind of went about as I expected. But for Toronto, it was a great way to start. Their next season after the Grey Cup, especially with Chad Kelly, quarterback. He had 3 rushing touchdowns in that game and had he was pretty efficient passing too. I mean, what is that? 213 yards on 14 completions. So he was impressive. And then that was I would say the best part. And then also what's his name? Quantez Stiggers. Give him a special shout out. He played defensive back in fan-controlled football. Didn't play college football at all, so that was definitely a good story to follow. And he had an interception in that game. Excuse me. And then, I think overall that went about as I expected. I mean, Toronto, to me, was going to win that game, especially given that it was at home. They're raising the Grey Cup banner, everything like that. It felt like a Toronto win. Again, maybe expected Hamilton to put up more of a fight. It was similar to last week. Like, obviously, Winnipeg is a tough opponent. Hamilton's definitely had 2 really tough opponents. You're playing both the teams that were in the Grey Cup in the first 2 weeks of the season, and you're playing, you're doing that. So that's pretty difficult. And ultimately, they didn't put up the effort that I thought they could, but hopefully that will improve in the games to come. Although right now I'm not so optimistic, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, Evan, with Quantes, wasn't it? I was reading that Dunnigan was trying to talk about fan control football, or they were trying to talk about it on the broadcast. Is that accurate?
All he said was a league where the fans called the plays, but he did not actually say fan controlled football. I did pick up on that. I was kind of waiting for him to say like FCF or fan controlled football or something along those lines, but it didn't happen. So
Somewhere Patrick Dees is shaking his fist. Like, no. It is funny though, like the way they'll go about talking to these players outside of, when they ever talk about McCall Thompson a lot in the USFL. It's when he played up north, or he played in a different land, or he played in a different. You're like, just say that CFL. Jason, I was reading on here. How was Hamilton favored coming into this match?
I think it was around a 2.5 point spread in favor of Hamilton, believe it or not, which was kind of shocking. I did actually on my channel I did take Hamilton to win the game by 1 point, but I just had a really tough time picking this game this week. I really should have seen the effort for the Argos coming out of the gate. I really should have seen that coming. So I'm kind of disappointed that I didn't take the Argos in this one, but the Tiger Cats were surprising favorites going into this game.
This AJ Outlet thing where he went viral with it wasn't like, I don't even know what wrestling promotion it was. It wasn't AEW or whatever. He was spearing the guy this week. And then that was very classic. I thought, putting the Hamilton Ticats thing on. Have you guys, Evan, did you track any of that, or is that outside of your purview?
I mean, I saw a bit of it around on Twitter. I know that he's been doing wrestling stuff, and I don't know how long he's been with the Argos now, but he's been there for a decent amount of time. He had a good game. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but he was someone who definitely carried the rock, and whenever they weren't passing it, they were definitely running it with him effectively. Him and Andrew Harris had a couple of carries, and he scored as well. So yeah, that was good to follow. But I didn't really, I don't know. I wasn't, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Like what wrestling league he was competing for, how any of that works. That is above my pay grade, I will say.
Jason, did you track any of that? Because I thought that was a pretty good. I want to pull it up. I thought that was a pretty good viral thing for the US or for the CFL to have.
I didn't actually see the video of it, but I did hear that he was. I believe it was some wrestling thing in Toronto.
Yeah. AJ Willette's got
Greek Town. Don't cancel us here.
How dare AJ Willette do this? Spear! Holy crap!
I mean, this is classic wrestling.
He's giving Jock the ring.
Giving him the Grey Cup ring here.
No. This is not. This is going to be a championship right hand by Jock Sampson. Don't violate a piece of championship memorabilia like this. Not in this ring. Oh, God. Trent Gibson is out.
I mean, that's just classic on there. Right? Does that do anything for you, Jason? I'm a wrestling fan. I get excited watching that.
Yeah, I love that kind of thing. Anything to get the logo of the team, or the association with the league out there to more eyes, especially for a niche product like the CFL. I think that's important. I'm not a huge wrestling fan myself. I never really grew up watching the WWE, but a lot of my friends did, and my brother was a big fan of it growing up. In fact, we were actually talking about it on the Go Train back last night.
Yeah, see, this is here. I won't play the audio again, but they obviously they took it and they superimposed the Ticats logo here on the poor gentleman. And so I thought that was funny. I mean, that probably makes you cry a little bit there, Jason. But I thought that was funny they did that. The other thing with this, Chad, living up to, I think, the expectations. Evan, I know, obviously coming off of last year, and he helped win the Grey Cup. But McLeod was in there, and then him going. There was just. It never really felt like they had any doubt with Chad. I know Brian Scott's up there and everyone else. But, Evan, are you just surprised how good Chad looked coming out the gate here?
No. I mean, there was a lot of hype about him in the offseason, and I think he worked a lot behind the scenes last year, even when MBT was starting. So I don't think this is a fluke or anything like that. I will say, I think it was John Hodge put up yesterday. He says, do you think do you think Chad Kelly kind of fits in behind, I think it was Zach Collaros and someone else is the third best quarterback in the CFL. And I said, well, just given sort of the instability at the position across the league right now, because there's been a lot of turnover, a lot of guys are getting older. There's a lot that needs to be proven. Yeah, there it is. I said, yeah, because just because of the uncertainty, I think that he definitely has the highest ceiling. It is a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to call him the third best quarterback in the CFL after one good game where he had 3 rushing touchdowns. But, I'm going to stand by my word and see how that goes through the rest of the season. I really do hope that, this is Chad's year and that maybe Toronto gets back to the Grey Cup with him having started the full season as opposed to just playing the one half of that game or whatever it was.
I mean, I don't really think this is that. I mean, I know John is known to be a little hyperbolic sometimes, but I don't think that this is that crazy. I think, besides Caleros, I wouldn't put Vernon in that category right now. I certainly wouldn't put Corn Dog. I wouldn't put Arbuckle. I wouldn't put Cody, really, Trevor Harris. I mean, Jason, do you think that's that outlandish that Chad's a top 3 quarterback right now? And I think that's a good thing. I mean, get a new guy in there to do that. But what do you make of this?
Well, I can't really disagree based on what we saw in week 1. Obviously, Tiger Cats didn't have any tape on them. That always plays a little bit of a factor. But I think from a physical standpoint, the athleticism that he has brings to the table, I think that was very impressive. And honestly, like you said, given the situations around the league, nobody's really shown to have, other than Caleros and maybe like Trevor Harris, to have that kind of consistent of a floor. I think that I'm very interested to see how Kelly does in the next couple of weeks, but I don't think it's outlandish to have him in the top 3 quarterbacks just based on that week 1 performance.
We had a thing here. Oh, Evan was in our group chat was saying, what's the over-under on the Ticats win this year? Evan's saying 7. Evan, do you stand by that? What do you make of the Ticats here going out the rest of the way?
I mean, I said this last week. I think they're in a bit of a rebuilding process. I wouldn't be surprised after this year if there was some turnover on the coaching staff. I think they'll keep some of the, core pieces around still. I know they have a couple guys that were left from the Grey Cup runs. But I don't know, I'm looking at this thing and I'm not seeing a team that is really going to be competing. And, maybe I'm proven wrong. I would hope so. But right now there's just a lot, that seems very not, I don't want to say scripted, but it's there's just certain teams where you look at them and you're like, if this person is, here by the end of the season, or if they're not doing this by this certain point, the outlook doesn't look great. And, Hamilton, I will say, had a very impressive run. I mean, they made 2 Grey Cups technically back-to-back between 19 and 21 since there was no 2020 season. Unfortunately, they weren't able to capitalize on that, and that was definitely a bit sad, especially because, I used to cover the Tiger Cats for a bit, and it was fun to see them go all the way. But, I think right now, especially, again, on the coaching side, I mean, we talk about the players a lot here, but I think there's a lot within that organization at the higher levels, that could be potentially looked at in a different way at some point. And that's not trying to discredit anybody. I think, Coach Steinauer has done a good job there, right over the course of a couple of years. But it just kind of gets to a point where, you're being figured out, I think is what I'm ultimately trying to get at here. That's my, sort of lead is they've been, they've had their run, but now it's you switched quarterbacks. There's a lot of things that are different for them already in this short period of time. And again, I just don't see this as a great year for them, unfortunately.
Jason, last thing on this, and I have it pulled up here with, obviously Bo missing, leaving the game, Schultz coming in, this lower body. Is this cause for concern? Or are we just getting him out of there for the week? What do you, is, with Bo being injury prone and everything?
Well, I think it's worth noting that they have a bye after this next week. So I think that maybe they start Schultz this week, and then they, because they have a short week, they play on Friday at home against Montreal. So maybe they, sit Bo for that one. Let him to sit on the bench for a little bit for a couple weeks, and then give it back for week 5. I think they play Ottawa that week, so I think that's an option for them, and potentially what we could see. I think Schultz, from what we saw, given that it was garbage time, you've got to take it with a grain of salt. But I think that he played better than Bo in this one, so I think that having that familiarity with the offense, you have a little bit of comfortability with Schultz. But at the end of the day, I think if Bo is missing the whole season or is easy out for a significant amount of time, he obviously has a history with injuries. So I think that's concerning, going forward for the Tiger Cats. But I will say, in terms of projecting over-under win or loss record for this team going forward, I still think they're going to win 8 games this year. look back last year, 0-4 to start the season. Traditionally, this team is a slow starter other than the 2019 season where they went 15-3. So I'm not too concerned. I think they'll probably, figure it out, get a 3 or 4 game winning streak somewhere in there. But at the end of the day, it's disappointing to have another slow start for this team. And I do agree that there could be some changes on the coaching staff. I think that Orlando Steinauer has kind of lived off the success of June Jones, who was the previous head coach, an offensive guru who, turned Brandon Banks into a receiver, into a great receiver that is, other players and, transitioned them into this great, powerful offense. And you've seen a decline every year in terms of their offensive production. So I think that's super concerning considering that, that Steinauer is a defensive head coach that doesn't really bring too much to the table in terms of offense. I think that Tommy Condell's been there for a long time. So, I mean, maybe it's getting a little bit stale. So I do agree with Evan that there could be some changes coming by the end of the year if this continues.
Yeah, Bo's making $500,000. I mean, that was a big swing on that. Big swing on that.
Yeah.
Coming up here. All right. So now we have, this was my my crowning life. I have my BC Lions hat on here. Not quite as electrifying as the Nathan Work 5 touchdown, whatever the heck it was, game last year that was like the greatest home. That we had one Republican, kind of all that stuff. I did laugh. First off, I thought to the game, Evan, and then I have a couple jokes here to make.
Yeah, I mean, this game, well, unfortunately, I mean, I expected BC to win, and they did. But again, I'm probably going to focus more on the team who struggled here, and that was Edmonton, being shut out for, I think it was the first time in 50 years or something, close to 50 years, since the 70s anyway. And, ultimately, this is just not acceptable by any means. And I know, again, I'll get to BC in a minute, but I think we need to talk about sort of the urgency here for Edmonton. And I said last week, this is a team, the leash really isn't that long, for a lot of players and coaches here because of their struggles in previous seasons. And so far, it almost just looks like they're regressing even more. I mean, scoring 0 points in a game, even if BC, turns out to be a 10-plus win team this year, which I think they will be, that's just quite frankly unacceptable. I mean, 91 passing yards, 1 turnover for Cornelius. I mean, you have to ask that question of when does, someone like a Trey Ford come in, or Kyle Oxley, who did complete a pass in this game. When does one of those guys, get a starting opportunity? I know Chris Jones has talked ad nauseum about how Cornelius has developed, and, he's been with Cornelius now for 3 seasons, but it gets to a point where it's man, I mean, come on, if it's not going to work, it's not going to work, and again, I don't want to sit here in week 2 saying that Taylor Cornelius can't do anything for this team because there's still 16 games left. But so far, I mean, he's had 1 long touchdown pass to Geno Lewis. And outside of that, I mean, there was not really much to work with there. He's a good scrambler. He can run when he's needed. But that's not going to win you the game, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that that's a great part of his game, his build, his mobility, but I don't know. I'm really not sold on that at all. And then, for BC, I thought they had a decent game. Could they have done a bit better? Maybe. There was a lot of weird sort of turnovers that happened early on where it was the ball just kind of seemed to be flying around between the teams, and there was a bunch of flags that, overturned those turnovers. I think one of them ended up counting. But, Vernon had 300 passing yards, which I thought was pretty good. Did have a turnover, but I won't fault him for that. I mean, he completed, 25 out of 35 of his passes. So I'd call it a good day for him. Taquan Mizzle, the running back, I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Yeah.
Definitely was impressive. At least that's what I gathered from this game, especially because he had such big holes to fill with James Butler leaving. Big shoes, I should say, not big holes. Anyway, he was impressive, at least to me. And then just going down the list, Justin McInnes had a really good game. Was good to see that after he had the big catch in week 1 against Calgary. Dominic Rhymes, again, another impressive. I mean, just look at this whole receiving core down here and how sort of balanced it is. Everyone's got 4 or 5 catches. It speaks to Vernon's ability to really spread the ball around. And I talked about that last week. I said they have so many good players in that receiving core, but at the end of the season, there might not be that much difference between, their top receiver and their 4th leading receiver. Just saying. But then, yeah, I'd say for BC, again, could they have, done a bit better? I mean, obviously they shut out the opponent, which is great. I mean, maybe you could have scored a bit more than 22 in that situation, but ultimately a good game for them. They're on the right track. Edmonton, unfortunately, not so much.
Yeah, I didn't want to hit up Baker yesterday because of Father's Day, but I want to get Justin McGinnis on the podcast here. I think that's our new kind of fresh with missing Lucky and missing Keon and everything else. I want to get kind of in his head here because he's really come on strong. Jason, what did you make of this? Just kind of slaughter of the Elks?
So I did an initial reactions video on my channel that got a lot of traction, saying how the Elks are off to a disastrous start. And it really has been a disastrous start for the Elks. I think that a lot of things are just inexcusable with how much talent I think is around this roster, how much talent they brought in the past couple of off seasons. I think that you look at how Taylor Cornelius has played. I think that it's really inexcusable because you have guys around him that have been productive receivers at other spots in the CFL. So what's the common denominator? It's the quarterback position. So I think that sometimes, or maybe they're just better off going forward, going with Trey Ford, running some kind of run heavy option offense, something like that, just to get the ball moving. Because Trey Ford, we saw him play a bit last year. I saw him start his first game in Hamilton. And I saw him, really make a difference with his legs. I think that really puts a lot of pressure on defense and could add another element that we're currently not seeing because, we say that, Taylor Cornelius does have some of that scrambling ability, but if you're going to just say that's his biggest strength, that's Trey Ford's biggest strength, and that's even a bigger strength for him. So I think that, going forward, that might be the play that they do, or go with Kyle Loxley. But something has to change with this Edmonton Elks offense because 0 points in a CFL game. I forget who said it. I think it was Kerry Joseph who said this about 15 years ago. He's like, we're getting shut out in a CFL game. That's unacceptable. So I think that at the end of the day, just so disappointing for Edmonton. But I do believe Chris Jones deserves a lot of heat as well. Going into a season with a field goal kicker that can attempt a 51-yard field goal, that is unacceptable. They had a couple of chances to take a lead early in this game, could have changed the entire tide of the game, even with the field goal. They passed up 50-yard, 49-yard field goal attempts for a punt. The punt goes out of bounds, and then they basically get no net yards on the punt. So I think that, at the end of the day, just a really disappointing performance all around for the Elks. Anytime you score 0 points is just unacceptable. So that's what I think about them. They just really need to do some soul searching and figure this out really quickly because jobs are going to start being on the line here. And then for BC, I think that it's just a matter of scoring more touchdowns. I think that defensively, they've looked excellent. Obviously, against Edmonton this game, take that with a grain of salt. But you look back last week, only allowing 15 points to Calgary. So 15 points allowed in 2 games. Hard to do better than that. And then I think, just like I said, finishing drives, scoring touchdowns is really the only complaint I have offensively. I thought they moved the ball very well.
Yeah, so a couple things here. I have this tweet saved. I thought this was good by Brock. Sorry, Elks fans, Cornelius ain't that guy. 26 games is enough of a sample size to figure it out. I agree with that, and I know that we have Daryl. I think that you used to write for CFL News Hub, and he's an Elks fan, and he's always been going on about it's Cornelius and all that stuff. It was what's weird to me. There was the quote at the end of the game, and I was trying to find the tweet I had where it was Chris Jones saying, "Hey, we have our quarterback. We're set with." I said, I don't know if you have your coach at this point. Like if you're that invested in, and I was filming the children's dance recital and I had my phone on my so I'm watching the game in silent the whole, the second half. I watched the first half, watching the game, muted the second half. And I'm seeing Kyle Loxley warm up on the sidelines. I'm like, why the hell are they? I'm like, oh, they're going to put in, Kai here at the end of the game and get Cornelius out of here. He finished the game. I mean, Cornelius finished the game. I thought that was weird. And then the BC thing, when Vernon finally had the touchdown pass, I saw kind of a look of relief because I do think that Vernon was afraid that they were going to go, TD-less the entire game, like you guys said, kind of completing drives. But to not score any points, like you guys said, in the CFL game, I was trying to explain to Dorothy how challenging that is with the Rouge and kicking. That's very, very hard to get. I think Dave Naylor said it was 1970 was the last time that the Elks had been shut out. Evan, in terms of Vernon, they called it good Vernon kind of at the CFL on the TSN panel at halftime. Was it good Vernon or bad Vernon this week?
Oh, it was definitely good. I mean, again, was it perfect? No. Could he be better? Yes. But ultimately, like, the only thing that I would really fault him for is, not finding the end zone that much. But that doesn't all go on his shoulders. I mean, as long as they can keep scoring and they can just kind of keep it this steady pace, I mean, they're going to be just fine. They're going to be, right behind Winnipeg there in the West, and, they're not going to have a problem. So.
The other question I had was Ed Gainey being out too. Looks like he's going to be out. That's going to be a big loss for Edmonton as well. Jason, any other thoughts? I don't know what the Elks do at this point. I think last year it was like the struggles at home, and that was kind of the joke. And now it feels like it's struggles no matter where they are. I mean, what would you like to see them do?
Honestly, I think I would go with the quarterback switch. I think, like you said, 26 games is enough of a sample size. And I think the big thing is we haven't seen any progression from Taylor Cornelius at all. So I think if he showed some signs of getting better, stringing some, good stretches of play together, I think you could justify having the position that Chris Jones has and saying that he's our starter going forward. But at the end of the day, we haven't seen any kind of consistency from him or any kind of progression from him. So I think I would look to the quarterback position because, like I said, you're wasting the talent of all these great receivers around you. I think Dylan Mitchell has -5 yards in 2 games. That's pretty rough because he was expected to be a breakout star in the CFL this season. I had him on my top 50 players list. So, at the end of the day, I think when it's hurting the players around you and that you really have seen the players around him like succeed at other spots in the CFL, it really shows you that the problem is the quarterback position. And also the offensive line hasn't looked ideal either. They're really not confident in those short yardage situations, probably the worst team in the league as we saw in week 1 against Saskatchewan. So that's a concern for them going forward. They kind of have a little bit of a flawed team building philosophy, in my opinion, whereas they built from the outside, the perimeter, and not really, built in the trenches. So I think, the Elks have a lot of soul searching to do. And, they just kind of have to go back to the drawing board, I think.
Yeah, like you said, I thought Mizell was good, but running back kind of filling in for BC. I know that there was obviously the concern there with Butler going. The other thing I thought, it seemed to me at least that Vernon was moving a lot more in the second half. It seemed like in the first half, he was trying to be a little bit too much of a pocket passer. And I don't know if they just got more pressure on him in the second half, but it felt like where he's scrambling more, he's a little bit better in that way, kind of trying to make up things and kind of be a little bit of an orchestrator on the field in that way. But yeah, I just have written here, corn dog equals duty. I'm just looking through my notes. And then it felt like they were finally trying to get rhymes going, that they had a couple of drop passes and he was missing that. Evan, any other thoughts on the receiving core? I know you were talking about them kind of getting, balanced workload there and a couple of the big stars being out right now for BC.
Yeah, I mean, the receiving core, I talked about them enough last week. I mean, they're doing a great job. Someone's always going to step up. And even if, they don't have the one guy that necessarily explodes onto the scene, again, it's always going to be pretty even. You saw how many guys on that list that had like 3, 4, 5 catches. It's very, very diverse, but very balanced at the same time. And I will say, too, just talking about Vernon Adams again for a second, I think BC, and someone said this in our chat too at some point, BC was extremely smart for getting Vernon Adams last year before Nathan Rourke left. Well, I mean, obviously Nathan Rourke was injured, and that prompted them to bring VA in. But now you look at, again, the sort of state of the quarterback in the CFL,
yeah.
It looks like a steal, to get a guy like VA who, again, maybe isn't exactly in his prime. Like you could argue that, VA, I think might have been like 2019 in Montreal was, at his peak. But even then, like he's still, one of the top guys. I mean, you could put him, to be honest, I would feel comfortable at this point, maybe putting him right behind Zach Collaros. We were talking about just like top 3 guys earlier. You could maybe put Trevor Harris in there right now, especially after his game against Winnipeg, which we'll get into in a minute. And then Chad Kelly, obviously, like we talked about, but I don't know, like, at this point, like I think if Vernon can take this team to the playoffs and they can have, another run and at least challenge Winnipeg again, I'd say that's a win. I mean, at that point, like I know Rourke was extremely flashy and I was very fortunate to see him play against the Elks last year where he had, just a phenomenal game. Best game I've ever seen in person by any quarterback, I think, at any level. Even though they had Rourke, Vernon, I think, can carry the same type of weight. Maybe that's a bold statement. Again, I understand how good Nathan Rourke was. I know his season was cut short. I get it. Trust me. But I really think that, Vernon, there's nothing like with his receivers. Like, I mean, who's stopping that? At this point, they're going to have to face a couple, difficult teams. I'm sure once they get to like the Torontos and the Winnipegs, like I said, maybe even like Montreal, it could become a bit more difficult. But right now, I think Vernon is on pace for a great season, and I think he could really return to that form that he was in, maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Keep in mind that, Lions also have Dan Evans here, where you're talking about kind of having the quarterback riches in there, where our backup is probably better than I would say. Certainly
Yep.
Cornelius and certainly whatever at this point. Derek Taylor had tweeted out, and I think Derek's going to come on the show this week, like who can play quarterback for the Elks right now? And I said, like, yeah, I'd call up like DeAndre Johnson or someone in the USFL, like, hey, you just missed the playoffs. Like, let's get you up here and kind of do that. Half joking, but, I mean, they could kind of figure that out. Last couple of notes from me. We had the big LL Cool J concert. I thought this was a funny tweet by Jacques. I don't know if you guys follow him on Twitter. It said, it's a real statement of CFL fan demographics, and LL Cool J concert is praised for appealing to a younger crowd. I thought that was good, but looked good. I appreciated the sweet shots of Amar hanging out with LL, like in their, whatever, in the owner's suite or whatever that was. I thought that was cool. And then I saw the tweets that I know that Edmonton did the Christian Salisbury kind of tribute last week. And I thought that was nice that BC kind of had that going at the beginning of the game as well for him. Obviously, passed away too soon and with the Edmonton, and we've tracked him through all the other stuff. Jason, any other thoughts? We'll kind of double time through these last couple games here. We're going long, but this has been good.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you guys said about Vernon. I think he has a chance to really rejuvenate his career here, and you're starting to see the signs of it. He played really well at the end of last season, so I'm glad he's in a situation that's very conducive to the way he plays. And, they may not be as explosive on offense as they were last year, but I think this defense could be even better than they were last year, as we've seen the first couple of weeks. So I think that we're going to have to see how they play this Thursday against Winnipeg. That's going to be a big test for them. But I'm excited about the BC Lions, going forward.
So we had the game here. This was the game I saw the least of. Like I said, Winnipeg really just kind of smacking around the Saskatchewan at home. I think they said that Winnipeg hasn't lost a game in Saskatchewan since 2019 or whatever. Evan, I know you didn't see much of this game either. This was the late Saturday game, but like I said at the top of the show, there was a lot of apologizing for Saskatchewan looking good, even in losing 27-45. To me, it never felt that incredibly close. Do you have any thoughts? And we'll toss to Jason.
I mean, yeah, like you said, Reed, I didn't get a chance to watch much of this game, if any. I went back and I looked at the highlights. Saskatchewan, I mean, they had a great day passing the ball. I mean, we can start with that. I know we already talked a ton about BC and their receiving core, but the Rough Riders had two guys, Sean Bain Jr. and Tevin Jones, went over 100 yards. And then I heard a lot of praise about Samuel Emelis too. There was a lot of people welcome to the CFL type of thing. So that was good to see. And then on the defensive side, I know, again, we haven't talked much defense yet, and I fault myself for that. But Larry Dean had a great game, and that's obviously a familiar name to me and many others. Roland Milligan, who I talked about on the show last week, also had a pretty good game, I thought, with 3 tackles for loss. And then for Winnipeg, I mean, yeah, it was just they've scored, I think, over, because they had 42 last week against Hamilton. So they haven't even had a game yet this season where they've scored below 40 points, which is staggering. I mean, that's just unbelievable to me. I mean, you want to talk about a strong way to start a season, that's how you do it. I mean, this is just the polar opposite of Edmonton. And I hate to, rain on the Elks parade there, if there is any parade, but I just feel like, I mean, it's such a contrast going from that game to this one, where you're looking at such a, diverse group of players. And, there's so many, what's the word I'm looking for? There's just so many, different outlets and options and whatever. I mean, if you look here, I mean, Zach Caleros, is posting a similar stat line, close to 300 yards every game, 2 touchdowns. He's just kind of automatic with that at this point. And then receiving wise, yeah, Dalton Schoen, who obviously came on the scene last year, 8 catches, 145 yards. I mean, your day doesn't get better than that. You tack on a touchdown too. Extremely impressive stuff from him. And then on defense, they had, a couple guys that I'd say, stood out. Celestin Haba, who's a rookie, I want to say from Texas A&M Commerce. He had a nice game. And then Malik Clements had 5 tackles for loss, which was also impressive. Same with Brandon Alexander, the cornerback. So, again, good to see all those guys, kind of really putting things together again. Like, I was going into the season, I really wanted to see how Winnipeg would start, especially just coming off their Grey Cup loss. It's like, how do you sort of tackle that momentum? Like, is it going to shift, because there's a lot of moving pieces there. You've been good for so long. But to be honest, they retained a lot of their, core players. And, obviously, I think I remember when Andrew Harris left to Toronto, and that seemed to be a big departure. But Andrew Harris is getting older now, and I always knew like Brady Oliveira was going to carry the weight, and he's done that so far. So things like that, they've just done a fantastic job sort of replacing the few players that they've lost. And I think that's why they're in this position where they can score 40-plus points per game.
Jason, thoughts on this? And I have a couple follow-up questions.
Yeah, so I actually, believe it or not, despite the 18-point deficit at the end of the game, I thought this was the most entertaining game so far this season. There was a point in this game where Saskatchewan was matching Winnipeg punch for punch. Trevor Harris looked incredible in this game, especially considering who they had out in the receiving core. Obviously, Keon Schaefer-Baker is yet to join the team this season. He's out with an injury. You have Darrell Walker, who was out with injury. So I think that Saskatchewan looked great considering the guys that they had in there. And, I think this game really changed on the Janarian Grant punt return, because I think that made it a 10-point game, and then Winnipeg just kind of take it home from there. But Winnipeg, just such a well-oiled machine in terms of their offense. I think that their defense showed a little bit of holes. I think the first couple of weeks of the season, they may not be as good as they were the previous couple of years, but I think this offense is better than they've ever been, and I think that's going to lead them to a lot of victories. If they're going to score 40 points every week, I think there's nobody that's going to stop them this year.
Yeah, was this the best punt return? I saw this at least top 3. I think Ben Grant was saying that as well. Top 3 punt return he's ever seen. Jason?
Yeah, it was absolutely incredible. I mean, just count the broken tackles and how far he went, like, laterally across the field, making guys miss before he turned it up. So, I mean, Janarian Grant is an all-time punt returner, I think, for what he's shown the past couple of years in the CFL.
The other thing I had, it ended the game, late game, when I finally got the game on, and Saskatchewan deciding not to go for it. We had seen Ottawa go for it on third down there at the kind of end zone, goal line, whatever, in the Thursday game. And I liked kind of that aggressiveness, because I was going back and forth with Christina Constable, and I said, if you're Ottawa at this point, what do you have to lose? Like, I would go for it. Like, what are we trying to save here? And I felt the same for Saskatchewan. Like, Winnipeg, you can't match. They always say that, like, you can't match touchdowns with field goals, especially Winnipeg. Like, they had the opportunity there to at least give it a shot, and I felt like not going for it and settling for the 3, and then Winnipeg comes immediately back, drives the field, and gets another touchdown. It's like, well, now you're down. I don't know. I just feel like you have to be aggressive there, and I feel like you have to play a perfect game to beat Winnipeg, and there was just too many issues there with Saskatchewan. Anything else from this one? I want to make sure we get to the Ottawa game. Jason, any other thoughts on the Winnipeg-Saskatchewan?
Well, I'm glad you brought that decision up, because I believe they were down by 14 points inside the 10-yard line, about 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter. So plenty of time left if they get the touchdown there to come back potentially in that game. But they decided to kick the field goal, and I'm just like, I'm a big proponent of always going for it if you're inside the 10-yard line on third down in the CFL, because if you turn it over, you're giving them a long field. Whereas if you kick the field goal, you're giving them the ball at the 40-yard line. Only gives the good offenses, you can get a couple first downs, they get that field goal right back. So the field goal doesn't help you in that situation. So I really don't understand that decision. Like you mentioned, Ottawa's decision on the Thursday night game, I think I really did agree with that one, despite it not working out. So, I mean, again, I'm a big proponent of going for it on 3rd and goal in those situations.
The other thing, too, you were saying Trevor Harris played good. I said he played good despite I was being told he wasn't going to play the game. Rod Peterson came out and said he's not playing. Trevor Harris is there. I know Andrew Murray was crying about that. I had anything else here? People say Trevor Harris, whatever. And then the last thing, the pizza feud. What was going on with this pizza feud? The Winnipeg, Saskatchewan. Did I miss something with that? Is this a Canadian thing?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay. There was something with Regina Pizza being duty or something like that. So okay. So anyway, enough with that. All right. Last game here, and this brought a little bit of joy to my heart because early on in the XFL season, there was a couple poor games as you would expect from a startup league in the first couple of weeks of gameplay. Marshall Ferguson felt the need to chirp off on Twitter about the poor gameplay, and I was very happy to have Marshall Ferguson on the call for quite possibly the worst CFL game of the week, certainly of the season thus far, with the Calgary Stampeders beating the Ottawa Red Blacks. Evan, initial thoughts on this game?
Yeah, this one was rough. Definitely a rough way to start the week. I remember putting this game on and I was like, oh, geez, man. Like immediately it just kind of stood out as like a sore thumb. And I don't want to, I know there's been, I heard some talk on Twitter about how sometimes when Calgary and Ottawa play each other, it ends up being like this. But I don't know. Like I was watching that game and it's just one of those games where it's like, what are we doing? Like what is going on? Like, like I don't want to say I can do a better job than, anybody that, is in these sort of positions. But I mean, you look at it and you're just like, I mean, there's just so many things that could have been done differently. I will say the one thing that I was pleased about was Tyree Adams getting some action in at quarterback for Ottawa. The Nick Arbuckle thing, like he started the game okay, but still turning the ball over, still not finding the end zone. Like all those problems are still there, right? So I think, again, the Red Blacks they've already started, maybe, I don't want to say making that transition, but like, would it be surprising if Tyree Adams, played again? No. I mean, he did okay. He still had a turnover as well, but like a tiny bit more efficient in the pass game and had more passing yards. So I'll give that one to him. Yeah, just the whole game really felt, sloppy, I think is the word for it. And I'm glad that, the game, like right after that, I think it was Winnipeg, Saskatchewan was the game after that, right?
The next day, yeah.
Day after, yeah. So I'm glad that there was kind of that turnaround. But man, like, I'll just say it's with all that in mind, I'm glad that Calgary was able to pull through because I do feel like they were the better team here. Was it a perfect day for them by any means? Not really. They did all right on offense. Jake Mayer, 270 yards. Dedrick Mills was someone I had my eye on, really the whole game. He was being talked a lot as, like, again, he had, some shoes to fill there. And then Reggie Begelton, he's been with Calgary now for a while. I remember back when I first started doing CFL coverage, he had signed with the Packers or something, and then now he's come back and, still with Calgary, doing his thing all these years later, it seems like. So, good for him on that front. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, this game was just kind of one where you're like, you're glad it's over and you move on. And I think the teams maybe thought that too. I could be wrong, but like that's what I just gathered from watching on my TV.
Jason, thoughts? I had a quote here, Bob Dice, after the game. We have to seriously look in depth at everything we're doing as a coaching staff. We have firm belief. We just have to correct the errors because, like, Mazzoli comes back. This isn't a different team, I don't feel like. What did you make of this really pitiful performance by Ottawa?
Well, one stat tells the whole story of the first two games for the Ottawa Red Blacks. 0 offensive touchdowns. That's inexcusable. And honestly, Edmonton would be right along with them if not for that 102-yard touchdown by Eugene Lewis in the first game. So Ottawa, I feel for them because they've been stuck in the mud for the last several years here. I mean, this was a team that just in 2018, they were in the Grey Cup. I mean, and just the last several years here, we just have not seen them get anything together, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I think that, the first half of this game was very hard to watch. I think that once Tyree Adams came to the game, it was a lot more watchable. Calgary also played better offensively in the second half. I think both offenses played terrible in the first half. I think really the only touchdowns that Calgary got were off turnovers. So, I think that was a really sloppy game from that perspective. But in the second half, I think Calgary got some things going. Good to get Reggie Begelton going. He had a very disappointing year in my opinion, last year. I think he was my number one receiver going into the league last season. So it was good to see him get going. Malik Henry had a big reception at the end there. But overall, I think that this game was won basically by one really strong drive in the third quarter by Calgary to get a touchdown. But other than that, I think that, Ottawa really just didn't get anything going. Again, not getting it in the end zone, and it's hard to win games like that.
Jason, do you think that Mayer is kind of fallen off here, not living up, or how do you kind of grade his performance thus far?
Well, first of all, I actually wanted to say that I believe these statistics are wrong. I think he actually passed for over 300 yards in this one. So, I mean, that's another thing with the statistical system. They're having errors all over the place. But I think he was better in this one. I think it was acceptable. Still not the level of play I'd like to see from him. But I think that I didn't really have any problems with his performance. The one turnover he had, I think it was off his receiver's hand. So I'm not going to really fault him for that. So I think he was much better than week one. So I think that given the bar for a quarterback play in the CFL right now, I still think he is one of the better quarterbacks in the league. And I think that, if he can just play like this going forward, even if he doesn't play any better than this, I think that, I think Calgary doesn't really have too many things to be concerned about going forward because the rest of their team is just very strong. They're always going to be able to run the ball. And that was a big difference from week one for them because against BC, they could not get that running game going whatsoever. In this game, Dedrick Mills had a huge game. So I think getting the running game going, allowing him to lean on play action a little bit more is a big thing for Mayer going forward.
The other, because Kadeem was out too, right? Is he on the 6th game? Kadeem Carey right now, is he on?
Yeah, 6-game injured list.
Yeah, so certainly not good there. We'll start to wrap this up. Look ahead here. I had a comment here. I might have to, on the StreamYard, I can put users in timeout if they have inappropriate comments. We have just to remind you, the defending Grey Cup champions are America's CFL team. I don't appreciate that, Mac, and I do not appreciate that. Yeah, Chris knows. I thought the BC Lions are America's team. Looking forward here, I have the schedule. Evan, thoughts? BC here with the early game kicking off Thursday. We'll have our show regular on Friday again this week in our regular weekend show here. BC going on Thursday, and then we have Montreal at Hamilton, Saskatchewan at Calgary, and then Toronto at Edmonton. That could be a scary one there. Evan, thoughts of the game you're looking most forward to heading into the weekend?
Well, I definitely think BC at Winnipeg is the headliner. That's going to be the real test for the Lions. They've come out pretty hot. A couple things they could have done differently, but ultimately they're 2-0. Both them and Winnipeg are 2-0 at top of the West. So that'll be interesting to see. I mean, BC's playing at their house. So that makes it a bit more difficult. That's definitely the matchup I'm most excited for. The other one that I'll talk about here is Saskatchewan at Calgary. I feel like that'll kind of be, one of those teams right now it seems like BC and Winnipeg are going to be the two, Western teams. But like Saskatchewan and Calgary, I feel like it's sort of, who slots in at number 3 there. And I think that might that'll be interesting. I feel like that game could determine a lot about just sort of how the rest of the season goes, especially just through the entire Western Division, even though it's only week 3.
Jason, in terms of, do you think Hamilton gets a bounce back here?
I reluctantly say they do. I do think they generally play much better at home year to year. And I think if Matthew Schultz is playing, I oddly have more confidence that they'll win this game. But Montreal's coming off a bye week, which is the Ticats kind of got screwed a little bit by the schedule makers at the beginning of this season. Obviously, Toronto having the bye week 2. They have to travel to Winnipeg week 1, and then Montreal off a bye again here. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But I think Hamilton coming back home generally plays with a lot more energy there. So I think defensively they'll play a lot better, maybe get Cody Fajardo to throw a couple interceptions here or there. So I think Hamilton, I'm pretty confident in a bounce back for them.
Mac the Knife here. You can win tickets to the XFL next year or the USFL 2023 championship game, which has not taken place yet. So we could still add 800 subscribers here before July 1st. So watch it there. And then Chris here, lots of emojis. I don't know if this is appropriate, but we'll put it on here. I think Cornelius got a lot of poop emojis here, and we're going to go beat the Argos that way. Should be exciting here. Evan, anything else from you before we get out of here?
I don't think so. Like I said, I mean, I really want to see some of these teams that are struggling turn around. I mean, that everyone says that, but I really mean it because especially teams like Ottawa who have been in the basement for a while, and same with Edmonton, especially those two. It's just, I really hope here that at least in the first month of the season that they're able to get a win and turn things around, because right now it looks pretty grim for some of those teams. Fortunately, Teams like BC have continued to be strong, even though they've lost some key pieces. The Argos, they still had a couple questions, even coming off the Grey Cup win. Clearly not a problem yesterday against Hamilton. Hopefully they continue that. Teams like that. I mean, everyone is in a different position right now, I feel like. And I mean that in some good ways, and I mean that in some bad ways. Like, there's some teams that have a lot of work to do, and there's some teams that have really none to do. Like, if you're Winnipeg, like, I don't see what you could really change to make things better. But that's usually how it goes about every year. I'm just a bit surprised to some extent that, like, some of these teams have shown, like, no improvement whatsoever, like, at all. Again, I get it. It's week 2, knee-jerk reaction, whatever. We're not going to, we're not going to, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, I'll stop rambling now.
That's good. Jason, we're here week 2 of this. You're now ingratiated in the writers group Twitter. Don't sell our secrets to the Canadians here. Anything else from you here as we work our way through the season?
No, I'm just excited for week 3. I think that we're learning more and more about these teams. I think once we get past the 3rd, 4th week of the season, then we get a much better idea of where these teams are at. I think once everybody's had their home openers and everything like that. So I'm excited to see what we have in store going forward.
I will say, if you're still on the fence here, I did tweet, if you're still on the fence and you're like, God, I don't really care about the CFL, USFL ending here. And I did have this tweet yesterday I was really proud of. The Breakers Gamblers game, first half, was one of the worst halves of football I've ever seen. I said, I publicly apologize to any fathers out there watching this game with their children. If you're still on the fence about the CFL, it can't be any worse than that half of football yesterday. So join us. Pat and I will be back tomorrow. We'll be doing USFL Week 10 preview. And then I think Pat is doing an all USFL team that we're going to be doing here on the podcast this week. I think Derek Taylor, like I said, is coming on. And I believe Rick Saratella as well. We're going to be talking the XFL rookie draft and the teams kind of rounding out. I appreciate everyone. Like and subscribe. Get your USFL 2023 championship tickets or XFL next year. I appreciate it. We'll get out of here. Thank you guys so much.